Hello, everyone. Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm good, Sheryl. How are you?
Good. Ben and I
Excellent.
are back with you for this episode to talk about spontaneous human combustion. And what is it? Well, it's the theory that people can burst into flames and just burn up. And we've just been having a pre-record chat about this. There's been a number of reports of people catching fire. And in most of those cases, people are almost completely destroyed, meaning that they're burnt up and, in the space of minutes, they're consumed by a fire, and all that remains is a heap of ash from which, legs protrude, or maybe an arm, or in one case, I was reading, a head was left. What a horrifying spectacle to come across that. Yuck.
Yeah.
So, and Ben was just telling me that, and I've read the same thing, that there's been about 200 cases recorded since 1600. That's what you read too, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely the same information. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where these cases involve almost no fire damage to the rest of the room, and yet the torso of the person is reduced to ash. And I find that really interesting, because I was looking up about a crematorium, what it has to burn at to disintegrate a human corpse.
Of course.
Yes, of course, a corpse. And it's 900 degrees centigrade.
Yeah, 900, and they still have to smash bones with hammers.
Yeah, and not only that, it takes 2 to 3 hours to burn completely.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get rid of a body.
Yeah. So the idea for me, and I know we're going to have a bit of a discussion on both sides of the fence about, can it be explained scientifically as opposed to paranormally, or just something that's natural that we don't as yet explain or understand. And actually, that's what in our last episode, Gary Opert was saying, that, there is no such thing as paranormal. It's just that there are things that we don't understand yet. And I think for me, I agree with that. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I think he hit the nail on the head there. It is about our understanding, not about whether something it's strange to us or unknown to us. And I think that's what it is. It's outside our knowledge.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of cases here to talk about first before we go through the nitty gritty of it and pull it all apart. So as long ago as 1861, there was someone called J.L. Casper who wrote in his Handbook of the Practice of Forensic Medicine that spontaneous human combustion was a myth. And in Forensic Pathology Principles and Practice, published in 2005, David Dolinak and his colleagues similarly state that spontaneous human combustion does not exist. And the same words appear in the National Fire Association's presentation called Fire Investigator. And in my own reading, probably like with you too, Ben, I found that there were different types of, some coroners are open to the idea of spontaneous human combustion and deem it as real. Like a Dr. Floyd Clemens, who was the coroner, can't speak in this episode. The coroner who examined the death in 1885 of Mrs. Pat Rooney. He accepted it as real and said that hers was a classic case of spontaneous human combustion. So,
and can I just add a little footnote to that too?
Please do.
That in December of 2010, so you've covered a couple of centuries there.
Yep.
There was a man called Michael Flaherty who was 76 in County Galway, Ireland.
Yep.
And he was recorded as having spontaneous combustion by the coroner. And that's in 2010. So back to you.
Well, this is the thing. When I started out looking at this subject, I thought, well, probably, you know, back in the 1800s, that things were being misinterpreted, that science wasn't at the same level of understanding that it is today, and a lot of things wouldn't have been able to be as, you know, understood very well. But like you said, and I thought so what I thought I'd find is that cases going back then, there'd be quite a few of them, and then in recent times there wouldn't be any, because, you know, people would say, oh, it's arson or it's this or it's that, and they'd be able to scientifically prove it. But that's not the case, is it?
No, it's absolutely not the case.
And I like in November 2012, a 42-year-old man was standing outside a record store in Sweden, apparently waiting for someone, and suddenly a fire appeared from his clothing and he burst into flames. And he blazed from within and formed into a fireball as he fell to the ground, narrowly escaping with his life. I mean, how horrible and agonizing would that be? But he lived.
But it's beautifully diabolic too.
So I guess the question is, spontaneous human combustion, oh gosh, I'll speak properly yet, is certainly a strange experience, but is it paranormal?
That's true. Basically, in my readings that I've never met anyone who's known someone who's had this sort of experience or had it themselves. So it's just purely my own armchair research with this. But they basically say that with the 200 cases that have been recorded over history, and perhaps there might be some exceptions to this, that the victims are often chronic alcoholics, that they are often elderly females. The body has not burnt spontaneously, but some lighted substance has come in contact with it. The hands and feet usually fall off, and the fire has caused very little damage to combustible things in contact with the body. And the combustion of the body has left a residue of greasy and fetid ashes and a very offensive odor. So, and if you see the photos of it, which you've probably seen, it is quite a shocking scene to when you look at that environment. And they tend to say that there's a phenomenon called the Wick Effect or the candle effect. And what that means is that basically, if you're infirm and you're in your chair, and you sort of have poor mobility, and you happen to be smoking and enjoying a brandy, something like that, and for some reason you drop your cigarette into your lap, that basically the clothes will become like a wick in a candle. And if you can't move, or you can't shout, or you can't scream, and often these people seem to be alone as well. So they're not saying, you know, Sally, come in, help me. There's people seem to be, you know, living alone. This wick effect happens when the cigarette will burn the clothing, and the clothing becomes like a wick, and then the fat burns, and over numerous hours, it'll eat everything up. And the reason the hands and the feet are left over is because they don't have a lot of fat in them, and the fire tends to die out when it gets to the extremities of the body. What do you think about that?
I don't agree with that, because the reason being, I mean, I think that's a possibility, of course, but I don't think it's the case in all of the spontaneous human combustion cases that I've read. And going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, that it's 900 degrees centigrade to burn a body. And, you know, and if something, you know, if someone caught fire because, you know, that they actually caught fire externally, right? For example, they were near a fireplace or whatever it was, or dropped a cigarette, had alcohol on them, whatever it was. They, for the legs to be left the way they are, for the torso to be gone and turned into ash, the whole room, the whole house would have to be burnt down.
Well, what the argument there is that often when these things have occurred, it's been say in winter months and things like that, and so the rooms are actually closed off. So the actual oxygen is not there's not open windows and things like that, so there's not a breeze coming in. I mean, and so that with all of that closed, then the fire will burn itself out because it doesn't have renewable oxygen. But that's what I've read. I'm not saying that that's how it is, but that's one of the explanations.
What about that 42-year-old guy who was in Sweden? And
I know.
Outside a record store, just burst into flame. I mean, and maybe we should get Paul Cropper on the show, because he could talk about fire poltergeist, and maybe that was a case of that. I don't really know.
Interesting.
Where fire just breaks out. And I know that Paul went into various places in Malaysia, I think it was, in Indonesia, to check this out. And actually you can read about it in the book that he did. I think it was with Tony Healy, the Australian Poltergeist, and in there he's got a section about fire poltergeist. So let's get him on next time. But going back to your question, or to your ideas, I just find it hard to reconcile the Wick idea with some of the ways that people's bodies have been found, and that they have to take 2 to 3 hours at that high temperature, right, to burn completely.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and I agree with you on that fact that it takes so much to get rid of a human body through cremation, and then why would a cigarette have the ability to completely burn a body to the same, almost to the same effect? You're talking like hip bones and femurs and big bones in the body all reduced down. So these explanations that we get are kind of like the explanations you get for UFOs and ghosts and things like that as well. Like they're plausible explanations that may explain a percentage of cases, but does it explain every case?
Yeah, exactly. And I had another case. It was the charred body of Madame Jeanette Kazimierczyk. It was discovered in her apartment in France on May the 12th, 1977. And all that remained were her legs. And they, like the furnishings nearby, were virtually unscathed. And the coroner concluded the case seemed to be one of spontaneous human combustion. So that's 1977. So, how can the legs be left virtually unscathed, and the torso, burnt in a pile of ash, and the nearby furnishings left untouched? I just find that very, very strange.
It is strange, isn't it? I mean, I was watching a little video last night as well, and a guy on that video was saying that there was a lot of cases up at, sort of really threw up until including the 60s and the 70s and perhaps the 80s. And then one of the things he was saying is that after that time, non-smoking became a really big thing in society, and that may have contributed to a decline in that type of death. Who knows? I don't know.
That's bizarre. There's another case that I found, and it sort of partly fits your demographic because it involved a 76-year-old man. Oh, that was the one that you told me, sorry.
Yeah.
In Galway. Sorry, it wasn't that one. It was, where were we? Actually, just a little bit more about that one, because the professor of pathology who was involved in that Michael Flaherty case, he said that this is the picture which is described time and time again. And he says, even the most experienced rescue worker and forensic scientist takes a sharp intake of breath when they come across a case. And the West Galway coroner said that it was the first time in 25 years of investigating deaths that he had been faced with such a case. So he officially recorded that death as spontaneous human combustion.
Which is quite significant, isn't it? Like that in that time, in this, the modern era, that he would actually take that as being the explanation.
But how else could we describe it? I mean, how else could you explain it? Let's just put aside a natural cause, the Wick Effect, and let's put aside anything else.
Is it possible? Is it possible that say with the young man in the street in Sweden, you know, having that experience, is it something to do with a chemical concoction within the body at a particular time? Is it that? Is it so, you know, as in like it requires a particular cocktail of chemical process in the body to create that sort of heat for a fire to spontaneously spring out from you? Is there emotional factors that come into it as well? Like, is there, you know, extreme stress or sadness or something like that? Can that be, or can these things be a combination of these things that contribute to it potentially?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, gosh, you have to think of what could possibly happen. And in that case of Flaherty, I mean, it says that he burst into flames from within. Well, within his clothing initially, I suppose. Did he have a cigarette lighter in his pocket? I don't know. There wasn't much about that detail about that. So that's a possibility those things happen.
Yes.
But again, it doesn't explain the classic cases, you know, where the torso is burnt. And that's the interesting thing. It's often the torso. It doesn't start in the head or the legs or the feet. It seems to happen spontaneously from within the torso. Why is that?
Well, does that indicate the cigarette dropping into the lap? You know, and some cases, yes, that would have to be the explanation. But you know, otherwise it's almost an undocumented phenomenon, isn't it? Like they've never had the opportunity to watch someone, you know, spontaneously combust. So there's no one sitting there to go, okay, what are the sets of factors around this person? Let's take his heart reading. Let's check his temperature. Let's run a whole host of tests on a subject who is about to combust. And maybe there's no indication either. Like, you know, the case in Sweden, like, did he have any pre-warning that this was going to happen to him? So, you know, did he feel a bit off that day, or he was feeling fine, and the next minute, whoa, you know? So it's who knows?
Well, you know, even if you look at it from a paranormal perspective, and I have no idea how that would relate to spontaneous human combustion, but again, why the torso? Why is that the origin point of this this fierce burning? I don't understand.
So is there any spiritual aspect to this, Sheryl?
You mean like what?
Well, like, is it sort of like a you know, a punishment or something like that, or you know, I'm sort of just trying to think about it. Like, is it something where some outside force is putting this upon you as a curse or something? You know, like, you know, if you believe in curses or hexes or, you know, that sort of thing. Which I'm not saying that this is it at all, but this is just spitballing on potential ideas.
So you're saying something like that brings to mind the old thing of, like, you know, not the old thing, but the Aboriginal idea of pointing the bone. But remember, in the pirates used to be given the black spot, was it the black spot of death or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the bone pointing is a classic one where someone points a bone and then you basically die because of the fear that it brings onto yourself, because of your belief in that that's what's going to happen to you.
Well, you know, sometimes people talk about for example, the Kundalini arising, which is in the base chakra, and it flows up through the body, and it opens up all the chakras on the way, and it's sort of like, phew, you know, it sets you on fire. I wonder if there could be some sort of what could I say, breakdown in the human energy system that could be triggered. Who knows? I don't know. It's bizarre.
It is, and look, we're going down roads that no one's really documented in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the phenomenon suffers from to a certain extent too. That because it's so closely related to natural causes per se, like cigarettes, etc. That it's hard to separate what is a natural event from what is an unnatural event.
Yeah.
So. You know, that makes it makes it difficult, I think, in this particular instance.
Yeah. Well, here's another case to let us pour over this one. This is
Sure.
a case involving a woman called Mary Risa, and she met her end on July the 2nd, 1951.
Yeah.
So this is in St. Petersburg in Florida. So on the July the 1st, she settled down at home at around 8 p.m. Oh, sorry. Yeah, previous evening, that's right. And her son and granddaughter had visited her. They found her comfortably seated in her armchair. She'd taken a couple of sleeping pills and was looking forward to a peaceful night. Next morning, a telegram arrived, and when her neighbour went to arouse her, she found the doorknob of Mrs. Risa's apartment too hot to handle.
Yeah.
Inside, now that's an interesting point in itself, because all these other cases talk about the damage just immediately around the body, right? Inside, they found the room was filled with smoke and flames, which were still flickering on an overhead beam. In the middle of the room, where the armchair had stood, was a pile of ash from which a leg was protruding. Now, that was all they could see of Risa. The conclusion was that she had collapsed and had set fire to her clothing with a smouldering cigarette, as you're suggesting, and the waft of air currents produced by cooling fans in the apartment had boosted the flames so that the body was consumed by fire. And then police at the scene said there was enough black soot to clog the fly screen, and damage was confined to the area immediately around the body. So again, how does that, if the damage is immediately around the body, how does that heat up the door handle to be too hot to touch?
I mean, is it creating an oven effect in the room? Like, you know, so is that temperature in the room rising as she's burning to the point where that, you know, that knob actually did? And how far away was she from the door too? That's another.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah.
Was she on one side of the room and the doorknob was on there? Was she right next to the door? We don't know that information about it.
Yeah.
But this is probably the most famous case, this particular case. If you look at spontaneous combustion deaths, her name always pops up.
Oh, right.
As being one of the most interesting or the most famous cases in this, you know, in this area. But I was reading about it too, and experts pointed out that a temperature of 2,500 degrees is necessary for such a thorough cremation, and that cigarette igniting her clothing would never have produced that temperature. So that's good to know. Yeah. And the electric outlet had melted only after the fire had begun, so it couldn't be the source. So there was obviously a power outlet in the room, and that had only melted after, not you know, like smoked up and blacked out like it had started the fire. So even lightning has been considered.
Yeah.
But there was none in St. Petersburg on that night.
Interesting.
So, you know, it's a very, and if you see the photo of it, like you can, obviously people can Google it. It's just this big wrecking pile of ash sitting there. So it's a very iconic image of spontaneous human combustion.
Right. Interesting. I was trying to find some cases from Australia. I did come across one in Adelaide. I didn't actually write it up, but I think Alan Tiller had actually published something about it, so people can go and search online for that. But
yeah,
it's there's not been a lot of cases in Australia. But having said that, let me just have a look at this one. I did go, if you go to online to Trove, you can find some there. And I did find one case, actually a few cases. Let me find it here, which was, now this was published in the Thursday Island newspaper, 1957, right? And this was a case of spontaneous human combustion. This was a Mr. Ashton. Did we talk about him yet?
No, I don't think so.
He settled down in front of his television set. A neighbour visited at 6 o'clock to make his tea. The next morning, the neighbour called the police. Fire officer Ron Bentley was soon on the scene. And the first thing I saw, he says, as I entered the room, was a hole in the floor and a pair of legs. the body had been totally consumed down to his knees. So he was convinced that what he saw was a real case of spontaneous human combustion. So there was almost no damage to the rest of the room, and yet the torso was reduced, to basically ash. So, that's amazing. The body's gone right down to the knees, hole in the floor. So it's hot enough to burn the hole in the floor. It would have been a wooden floor in those days for sure.
Absolutely.
And there's just legs from the knees down left.
Well, it's classic, isn't it?
Well, some very strange things can happen to the human body. And I have to say, there's someone I know whose eye exploded.
Wow.
I believe that, yeah, because he was having problems and something had happened, and then all of a sudden he couldn't see out of that eye, and he went to the ophthalmologist. He says, your eyes exploded on the inside. Like it didn't come up in flames or anything. And I think he ended up with a detached retina and a few other things, but and they had to wait for it to heal. But that would be to do with a blood pressure thing, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but strange things.
Yeah, there's another one here I found fairly recent, I suppose, February 18, 2013. So that's obviously more of the modern time. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, the neighbors of a 65-year-old Danny Van Zant saw smoke coming from his house and called the fire department, who attempted to put out a pile of burning trash in the kitchen, only to realize that it was human remains.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the floor under the remains was undamaged and no other objects or furniture in the house showed signs of fire damage. There was no sign of an accelerant being used, nor any indication that a struggle had taken place. And the county sheriff, Ron Lockhart, who had 20 years experience as an arson investigator, said that he had never seen anything like it and speculated if it was related to spontaneous human combustion. And Van Zant had been reduced down to just 40 pounds worth of matter by the localised fire. And it was noted that he had been a heavy drinker and a smoker. And an autopsy of the remains was called in the hopes of explaining the matter. So that's an interesting case as well, from as close as 2013. I was able to find a pretty good little website that actually documents a lot of these cases from 1600s right through to 2017, being John Nolan's fiery death. So yeah, there's a lot of examples. There's definitely a lot of examples, and all of these sort of stories are following very similar narratives.
So what way are you leaning towards? What, the Wick idea, the paranormal, or something else?
Well,
what do you think?
Thanks for asking me. I think it's possibly a combination of all of those things, and I think probably there's a good chance that the Wick Effect, or a mundane mundane explanation can explain it. Yeah, I can't talk.
I passed it on to you.
You passed it on to me, exactly. Yeah, blah blah. So yeah, so I think it is possible that does happen in some instances, but then the cases out there that sort of challenge that sort of make me still have a bit of a thought that, well, maybe there are instances where it is something else. So I'm kind of maybe thinking that it's let's say 70% explainable and maybe 30% unexplainable.
What about if you lived in the 1600s? What would you be thinking?
Oh, I'd be thinking it was the work of the devil.
Some witch had put a hex on people.
Absolutely, and he's been punished for his evil ways. That's what I would have thought in the 1600s. No question about it. You can take your Wick theory, throw that out the window. It was the devil's work. That's what I would have thought. So what do you think?
Well, I've got to go along with the coroners in 2010, 2012, and they think they're real cases. Some of them are real cases of spontaneous human combustion. I mean, one day we might understand that more. I mean, I'm trying to think of a physiological explanation, like an overload of hydrochloric acid or something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Or,
too much chili.
Oh, I just can't think of anything that would produce something like that. That would, where a body would have to burn at 900 degrees centigrade. What is about double that for Fahrenheit, around that, or more, and burn for at least 3 to 4 hours. I mean, you think of those the cremation devices at the crematoriums, ovens, whatever you want to call them. I mean, they are phenomenally hot, and they've got to roar along for a few hours. I mean, the energy, where does the energy come from to burn a body like that? I don't understand. I mean, I'm actually starting to think maybe there's a collision of dimensions or something.
Wow.
There could be something like that. Or I'd be very interested to know if in the area, if there had been other types of paranormal experiences, so that it was like a region or a location where strange things were happening. And remember that these people are found on the floor with, or not, legs found on the floor, and there's a hole in the floor, and the furniture's not felt. I mean, if I had to let my mind go wild and say, okay, so there's an underground lava expulsion or something, I mean, you'd see the lava, or you'd see something in the environment that would show that there's some sort of external reason for that, but there doesn't seem to be any of that.
No, and a lot of these cases are the elderly, So let's talk about age here. So so a lot of if you go through the 200 cases that are listed, and a lot of them are elderly. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, so that really is leaning towards the Wick theory, and they're infirm, they're smoking, perhaps drinking, maybe unhealthy lifestyle, who knows, alone, no one to help them out. So, but then I found a case from June 1980, where a Toronto woman who was aged 31, that's not old, she awoke at 2:30 a.m. with severe burns on her thighs and abdomen, and she survived this odd experience, and her nightdress and surroundings were undamaged.
Oh, that's just bizarre.
Well, that's backs up, like a non-Wick. Well, that really challenges a Wick experience, a Wick answer, doesn't it?
Yeah. And while you're saying that, I'm thinking about the strange things that the body and the mind can produce. Look at stigmata, for example. Where does that come from? That doesn't seem to be from an external source. It seems to be something that arises physiologically onto the surface of the skin, right? And people can start bleeding in the palms of their hands, their feet, and on their forehead sometimes, where supposedly Christ was nailed to a cross, although I don't think it was actually nailed. I think it was actually tied. But anyway, that's for another time. But so there are some very strange things that the human body can do, and this is sort of where I go back to, could this be something that we, as yet, in some very rare circumstances, that can arise within the human body? But I just still can't explain where all that energy comes from, and prolonged energy too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's think about our 31-year-old Toronto woman for a moment. She wakes up at 2:30 in the morning, and she's suffering from burns to her body, but her bed and her nightdress are not burnt. It has to be some type of an internal reaction in the body, doesn't it? It has to be something like that. And maybe that's an example of a spontaneous human combustion not going the whole 9 yards. Like it started and it's woken her up, and that was the end of it, rather than she was passed out or unconscious, which perhaps other people have been when they've had these experiences. So what caused her to have that internal reaction? And nobody has that answer.
Yeah. And actually, what causes all these strange things to happen with people? Like, look, what about people who become magnetic? How does that happen?
And you don't have to have a steel plate in your head for that to happen.
Well, you'd think so, but that some of them have been tested and that doesn't happen at all. So, how do all these strange things happen? And maybe, what about that particular demographic who are susceptible to spontaneous human combustion? And not all of them are old or infirmed or flabby with lots of fat, right? Maybe there's something else that we're not picking up on with that demographic. Maybe there's a scattering of people on the planet who can tune into something that's radiating and ignites them that the rest of us don't.
Oh, is this going back to your dimensional theory?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
That's,
I don't know. I mean, we know that there are certain types of people who report close encounters with extraterrestrials or something strange, certain types of people who report seeing ghosts, report spontaneous mediumship, see dead people. What about if there's certain types of people who have stigmata, who are prone to spontaneous human combustion, who are prone to being magnetic? I mean, there's a whole lot of things that we don't understand about ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. And I've also just found another young person.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, March 28th, 1974. A woman in Balcon, Cheshire, England, was found in an apartment sitting in her armchair and dead from a localized fire, and no cause was reported. So, here she is, 35, dead in a chair, and they haven't found a cigarette or any indication as to what caused her to die. So,
how much of the body was left, did it say?
Doesn't give you that level of information. No, just as a 35. It doesn't tell you whether it's her hands, feet, or whatever, but just she was found in an apartment sitting in an armchair and dead from a localized fire. So maybe she was not like completely burnt. Who knows? But
well, here's another thought, Ben, is that predominantly the cases that I've read, it's the legs that are mostly left.
Yeah.
Not the arms and the hands or the head. It's mostly the legs. Now, why is that?
Well, if you listen to this, so if you go back to their theory, it said like there's fat's not in that part of the body, so therefore that the fat's not sustaining it as a fuel source once it gets down to the outer extremities of the body. So, and maybe feet are particularly hard to chew through. Fingers might be a little bit easier, but
we don't have a lot of fat in our head.
Not really. That's what I reckon too. Well, there are some fat heads out there, but yeah, there's some fat heads out there, but for different reasons.
Or our hands.
Yeah, true. Yeah, right? Exactly.
Hands, fingers, forearms, not a huge amount, not in our wrists anyway. I mean, why aren't hands with wrists and fingers left? But it's mostly legs are left. Very strange.
That's another strange factor about it as well. Yeah, what's going on? But again, this is all cold. This is all basically the thrill of the mystery. Like, you're left with a scene, and you have to try and reconstruct how it came to that result. Which the fire department and the police and the coroner all have to do in each and every one of these cases. And maybe they are also by rote always looking for natural explanations.
Now, here's another thought. My understanding is from cases that I've read about of house burnings where people have died in the house, they've been burnt to death, that their body is not left in ashes. It's left charred, but it's not left in ashes. So again, those house fires can really roar, as you know, and get up to very high temperatures. So how can that happen? And some of those house fires can go on for a few hours too, of course.
And you'd think hot enough to just totally destroy a body, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but they're not. They're often left charred. My understanding, I could be wrong, but from the cases that I've read, that's what's happened. Very burnt, but still identifiable as, mostly a human body.
Yeah.
So again, it's very different to spontaneous human combustion cases.
That probably also comes back to where they're found as well. So if you, for some reason, were in a house fire and you crawled into the bathtub, right, and your apartment's burning all around you, you're basically going to roast alive in that bathtub long after you've run out of oxygen to breathe, because the smoke will choke you to death first, which is probably a blessing. Or if you're found in a corner of a room, or if you're found upstairs, downstairs. So whether those factors have something to do with it as well, where the body is in relation to the fire. If you're talking about a full-blown inferno where everything's gone up, or if it's just the front part of the house, back part of the house, I suppose it's circumstantial as well, I suppose.
Maybe I'm calling it paranormal.
Well, that's it. That's kind of,
as we discussed last time, paranatural.
Paranatural, yes. I mean, this is not the skeptic show, so so I want to point that out to everybody. But we like to consider all possibilities as well.
Yeah.
And obviously the viewer will have you be the judge.
Yeah, actually, I would love to hear of cases that we haven't mentioned. If anyone watching this knows about a spontaneous human combustion case, particularly in Australia, I would love to hear that, because this is Strange Encounters Downunder. But, we've been all over the place with this, but, these cases happen all around the world. So if you know of anything like that, or anything even unusual, that you can't, even in your own personal life that has happened, God forbid, to someone in your family, or a friend, or someone you just knew, that was never really fully explained, we would love to hear about it.
We would. And that's the thing. Like, I was really disappointed to find that I couldn't really find much in the way of Australian incidences of this occurring. I thought, well, okay, there's roughly 200 cases, probably more than that, but generally accepted 200 cases in the world. Surely there's got to be at least a couple of Australian ones that may have made the news over the years. But I thought to myself, I can't think of a single case that I've heard of in Australia in the news over the years about a mysterious burning or something like that. And and there's something really appealing about a mysterious burning. It gets the investigator really excited to think about, a particular set of circumstances that can't be explained, which is really what this show is about. Looking at these things that can't be explained. So we can sit here and conjecture on what these things are, and this is as good as any of them.
Yes, yeah. And I was just going to say, one last thought I had was, this could happen to animals, but because they're animals, we wouldn't take any notice of it. We say, oh, someone started a fire and chopped a piece out or whatever and cooked it over an open fire and left bits and pieces of it around, but we really wouldn't know.
Well, one of the interesting things is cows, because cows actually have a lot of methane inside them. So, and methane's quite a combustible gas, as in you can run your car with it. So, it's a highly flammable gas. So do cows spontaneously combust? Most vets would probably say, no, have never heard of that happening before, but maybe it's not seen as that by, people who come and look at it. And I'm not saying that there's cows combusting all over the place, but it could be as similar to when it happens to humans. It might be an uncommon occurrence.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone who knows about anything like that too. That'd be that'd amazing.
Great. Love to hear that.
Yeah. Anyway, if you've had a strange experience, we'd love to hear about it, no matter what it is. So do put something in the comments, or contact us via the Facebook page, Strange Encounters Downunder, and let us know.
Please do. Please. Yeah. We want to know. We must know.
Yeah. I want to know these things. I really do.
Yes, we do.
So anyway, until next time, take care of yourself. Stay away from open fires. Don't drink and don't smoke. If you do. Oh dear.
Good advice, Sheryl.
Hey, good advice.
Good advice.
All right. Well, we'll catch you next time, next episode. Thanks, everyone.
See you next time, everyone.
Bye.